And in that light, we've been exploring the place it's said that we arrive at when we no longer need to try. And in the way of stories, we've already explored its science, its physics, its chemistry, and we've even looked at its psychology. But as we come to the end of our exploration, let's see what this story does for us and where it takes us in our exploration, certainly in the light of what Alice has just been recounting to us. And it's a story about a king. He was rather arrogant, as some kings are, but he would often, in the company of his chief minister, go out into the streets to ensure that the populace was following all his laws and the way he ruled, etc., etc. But one day, when he and the minister, in disguise, were wandering through a bushy area, they came to an old man who was sitting there, his long white beard dragging down in the dust, but he was writing on pieces of paper and throwing them up in the air, and they would fall down and he would catch them. So the king, in disguise, and his minister asked the old man, "Well, what are you doing?" And the old man said, "I'm asking questions and getting answers." And so the king said, "Well, what questions are you asking?" And the old man said, "Well, I've found out that you're the king and you're with your minister in disguise." And so the king and the minister were very, very curious about what was going on. So the old man opened another piece of paper and he said, and this tells me that your wife has just given birth to a daughter." And then another piece of paper went into the air and he opened it up and said, and this piece of paper says that there is a baby born not very far from here who will be the husband of your daughter. So the king was really quite perplexed by this, but being the being that he was, he turned to his minister and he said, "I have destiny in my hands. Let's go and check this out." So he asked of the old man, where is this place that this child has been born? So he was given directions and he made his way, but what he and his minister found was that this baby boy had been born into a hovel. A woman so poor she didn't have any food on the table or nothing of comfort around her, and the king was totally affronted. How could it be that my daughter, a princess, could possibly marry someone of this station? Destiny is in my hands. So he said to the woman, "I'll give you gold if you give me your child." And she said, "How can I give you my newborn child?" But he said, "If you don't take this gold, you and your child will die of starvation." So after some further bargaining with great regret, the woman handed over her baby boy to the king and his minister. They took the baby boy along with them, but they hadn't gone too very far when they came across a farm. And the king said to the minister, "Take this infant and throw it into the mill that grinds the wheat that the farmer obviously grew." But as it happened, the garment of the infant caught on a little outcrop inside the workings of the mill. But the king and the minister had gone off believing that the child's fate had been sealed. But, of course, the farmer came out, and hearing the cries of the infant, discovered it hanging on the inside of his meal and was overjoyed, because here was the son that he so longed for to help him in his old age. So the boy was nurtured and grew. But after some while, one day the king said to his minister, I wonder what happened to that child, the child that we threw into the mill. Why don't we go and check up? And the minister, being somewhat of a wise man, said, destiny. God, with God, all things are possible. So they went off, and of course when they arrived at the farmhouse, there was the farmer with the young boy with him, and so the king asked, who was this boy, and he told him the story, of course, that he'd found him hanging on an outlet in his mill, and he had taken him as his son. Well, again, the king affirming that destiny was in his hands, he offered the farmer a great deal of gold, saying that the boy would have a good future with him. And so it was that the boy was taken off. But now the king said, I'm going to take and ensure that this thing is done. So as soon as they were on a road back towards the palace, the king took out his sword and beat the child until he was just a bloody mess in the middle of the road. So at a point of time the minister said to him, Sire, you have rendered him lifeless, let it be. And so they left this mass of broken and bloodied flesh in the middle of the road and went on their way. But as it happened, there was a physician, a doctor, who was on his way to take care of an ailing woman, but he found that when he tried to bring his horse to guide him down the road that would lead to his destination, that the horse refused to move. So even though the physician beat the horse, it would not follow his orders. So finally the physician said, I'll just let you have your head. So immediately the horse turned around and took a route which took them on the road in which the bloodied mass of the young man lay. So when the physician alighted from his horse and checked, he found that there was indeed a thread of life still in this being. So tending to him, taking him into his care, he brought him back to health. Now he grew into a fine, intelligent and handsome young man, and some years passed when one day again the king said to his minister, Now, remember that time when I beat that child to death? And the minister again rather sagely says, destiny. With God, all things are possible. So the king said, let's just go and check. So they made their way back into the place, the crossroads, where they had left the body of the boy, and they found that there were a number of people gathered around someone, and he asked, well, who is that? And one of the bystanders said, well, this is a very famous physician, and he comes to help the people, and they're all milling around to seek his services. But it was noticed that there was a young man going amongst the people, handing out pieces of paper with numbers on them, of course, to make order amongst this who could be brought into the presence of the physician. And so a bystander told the king a story, that one day the physician was on the road when he found this beaten up boy and brought him to health again and again adopted him. So the king, of course, was totally affronted. And so he said, I will take care of this. So he wrote a letter and put his seal on it. And he asked permission of the physician to give this letter to his adopted son to take to the palace, to hand to his guards. Now, it so happened that the king on that very day had to go to battle because his land was being put upon by his neighbors acquisitively. But the young man, as the king went off with his entourage to do battle, did as he was ordered, and he took the letter that was given to him to the palace to hand to the guards. And the contents of that letter said, whoever hands you this letter, kill him immediately. But by the time that the young man had reached the palace gates, the night had fallen, and so he was unable to enter. But it was a full moon night, and he was very tired. So he lay outside the palace gate, putting his head on the letter that had been given to him to hand over. Now, it so happened that the princess, the daughter of the king, unable to sleep, came out on her balcony and looked down to see this being, this fine young man, lying outside the gate. And seeing that he had under his head an epistle of some kind, she had her servant immediately go and find out what was going on. But she was aghast when the letter was brought back to her, giving the order to kill this young man, because something within her had stirred so greatly. So immediately she tore up the letter that her father had written and wrote another letter saying, bring this young man to me because I am going to marry him, arrange the wedding. So it so happened that the minister, receiving this letter, which of course had the monarch's seal on it, did exactly what the letter said, and he arranged the wedding straight away. Now the king was away for 3 years, and during that time the princess gave birth to 3 children. So when the king came back from the battlefield, there to greet him on the steps of his palace were 3 children. And he said to his minister, whose children are these? And the minister said, well, sire, they're your grandchildren. How can that be? Said the king. And the minister said, I was just following the orders of the letter that you wrote, ordering me to arrange the wedding with this young man. So of course the king called his daughter to him and ascertained the whole story of what had happened. But in that moment, the king had two very great realizations, after which he accepted his son-in-law indeed as his son, and not just his son, but also his heir, because eventually this intelligent, handsome young man took over the throne. So of course, the question that arises for us, relevant to our continuing to explore, understand the place that we arrive at when we no longer need to try. In this place, what say you? What were the realizations that came to the king? In this place, where we no longer have the need or even the possibility to impose anything on life. What were the realizations that came to the king?
That he's not the source of power, and that he has to obey.
There's no point to try and stop it. Can't fight destiny.
Destiny, fate, Kismet. What else are we going to find in this place as we come to the end of our exploration? So we can say we can't fight fate, destiny, Kismet. And yet in this place that we find ourselves, is there anything solid that we can clasp? Can you with your mind define and make solid fate, destiny, Kismet, God? So what comes after this recognition? The realizations of the king, just like we can state, you can't fight destiny, fate, Kismet. What else?
Anything is possible.
Anything's possible.
Well, the king kept on thinking that he was the one who had destiny in his hands, and he's the one who controlled it all, because he was the king. And he kept on saying that. And he had 2 attempts at it. And then he had to release that, because he realised no matter what he did, he couldn't get his way.
Yes. So where does it leave us? What are we standing on?
Accept.